and he sees the way the Chinese emperor is treated. He's like, dang, what about me? I should be treated like a god too. I want this. I want to be powerful like him. I want all those girlfriends that he has. But now we're actually going to start talking about Japan. Okay, so this is our new unit, Japan here. And the story of Japan is a very interesting one, especially when it relates to China. So in many ways, Japan in its early history, they were influenced a lot by China. They were like that little brother that wanted to be like their big brother. They were influenced by China in so many ways, as we're going to see. So it's kind of like these guys here, okay? These are my cousins. Believe it or not, bunch of guys that thought they were cholos. So me growing up, and believe it or not, when I was a kid and I would be influenced by people like this. I was influenced by people like 50 Cent and Tupac and all these little cholitos running around and doing all that sorts of stuff. And you know, the way that influenced the way I acted, it influenced the way I spoke, it influenced the way I dressed. Believe it or not, I would be dressed kind of like this with baggy pants because that's kind of what the cool thing was, right? And that's how Japan was in relation to China. They started copying a lot of stuff from China because they wanted to be like China so bad. By the way, I don't know, these guys are definitely not gangsters, by the way. They're not in a gang, they don't do illegal stuff, or they didn't do illegal stuff. You know, they're not throwing up gang signs. You know, again, not really gangsters. These guys are actually pretty nice guys. And I myself am not a gangster anymore.
So you wanna be a gangster?
No, I'm joking. Obviously, I'm not a gangster. But yeah, by the way, when it comes to cholitos, like, I could never be a gangster because I could never throw up, you know, the gang signs like they do. I don't know what they're doing with their fingers. You know, I could never do that myself, so I could definitely never be a gangster. You would think, right? I mean, they would put their talents to good use. Yes, they're obviously very good with manipulating their fingers in such a way that they make letters and whatnot. You know what they should be doing? They should be helping out the deaf. That's what they should be doing. They should be out there trying to help people that cannot, you know, that cannot hear, and therefore, you know, translating for them using sign language. Wouldn't that be great if all the cholitos around there would just band together and help deaf people instead of creating deaths and violence? That they would do that. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? So, and it's kind of interesting, there's actually a group of people, I think it's in Cambodia, but they don't even understand Spanish or English, a lot of them, and they dress up like Mexican cholos, and they act like Mexican cholos just because they think that it looks kind of cool. It's kind of interesting how, again, people influence each other, and again, that's definitely the story of China and Japan. China was such a massive empire, such a massive dynasty, that it had a huge influence all around the countries around them. Okay? So, Japan is actually built on a series of mountainous islands. Mount Fuji. So, Mount Fuji is actually a volcano. So, a lot of volcanoes or a lot of earthquakes happening in Japan. It's literally around what they call the Ring of Fire. So there's definitely a lot of earthquakes there. There was a huge tsunami some years ago that was completely devastating. Constant earthquakes, constant tsunamis, and it's something that the Japanese people kind of had to adapt to, right? So another thing they had to adapt to is the fact that they were actually, Japan is actually on a series of mountainous islands, leaving very little room for farming. You know, not a lot of space for them to farm because the little farmland, the little land that they do have is mountainous. So in a way, they kind of have the same problems as the Aztecs of not having a lot of land, and the problem of the Incas because the land that they did have was very mountainous. So one of the big challenges for them is not having enough crops, is adjust to this by basically fishing. So they didn't have a lot of protein. They couldn't grow a lot of animals like chickens and cows. By the way, interesting fact, there's actually, for every one human being alive today, there's about 2 chickens. So for every human being on earth, there is double that in terms of chickens. So there's just chickens, a lot of chicken out there. So for those of you guys worrying about shortage of food, a little interesting fact for you guys to kind of ease your mind. But Japan itself had a huge problem with this, okay? They did not have a lot of animals to eat. So again, they looked to the ocean for food. They looked to the ocean for the source of protein, okay? So the ocean became a huge source of food for Japan, especially early on. So they used a lot of boats to move around because Japan is actually not just one big island, it's actually a lot of islands. So they would move around from island to island and they would fish for food. The ocean was very important to Japan. Okay, so it relied on the ocean for food. It relied on the ocean for protection. Protection, because it was an island. It had water all around it, and that allowed it to be pretty protected against foreign invaders, against other people that might want to come into Japan and conquer it. So this obviously was very, very good for them. And also as a way to transport stuff and to move around. Again, because there were a series of islands, you can hop around from island to island very easily through the ocean. Okay? A lot harder to do, let's say, like the Incas who lived high up in the mountains. That was a lot harder for them to move around from place to place. So because of this, their main food sources became fish and rice. And the reason for rice is pretty simple. Rice you can grow a lot of rice in a relatively small plot of land. Okay, so you flood it, you create terraces, and you're able to flood it. The water drips from the top terraces all the way to the bottom, and you can grow a lot of rice. So they combined the two to create sushi. Okay, they made, which by the way, I hate sushi. I hate all seafood actually. But anyways, a lot of people I know love sushi. I love Sushingon, or what's that other place called? Culichi Town, where it's basically like it's sushi, but it has carne asada and pollo instead. That's actually pretty good. But anyways, so they created this sushi, and it basically made use of seaweed, which there was plenty of because they lived around the ocean was surrounding them. They had plenty of fish, and them growing rice, and they put it together to make this type of food. So let's get here to Prince Shotoku. So Prince Shotoku was obviously a prince, and he made his way to China, and he was blown away by what he saw there. He went to China and he saw how rich they were. He saw how advanced they were. He sees huge giant buildings. He sees beautiful women everywhere, and he sees that the emperor there had a lot of girlfriends. He sees that. And he was kind of jealous. He was jealous of the Chinese emperor. He sees the way the Chinese emperor is treated. He's like, dang, what about me? I should be treated like a god too. I want this. I want to be powerful like him. I want all those girlfriends that he has. I want all that money. I want those big buildings. And it was kind of a selfish reason, right? He really mostly wanted to become just like a Chinese emperor. And he also wants to put Japan on the map. He wants to make Japan a powerful country too. So what does he do? He copies China, he puts all the power, and he basically puts it together. He basically accumulates power to make himself a powerful emperor. Because before this, you actually had a lot of feudal lords, a lot of nobles that had a lot of power in Japan. So he takes away this power from them, essentially makes all the land of Japan now his, and this has obviously a huge effect on the country. A lot of nobles obviously didn't like that. But again, he was influenced by by what he saw in China, and especially the Chinese emperor. So it's kind of like, you know, how a lot of kids are influenced by Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, and they're like, oh my God, they have those shoes. I want to have those shoes too. So they start buying up the shoes that the soccer players are wearing. So when Buddhism finally makes its way to Japan, just as sometimes happens when things are copied, they're not copied exactly the same. So when Buddhism makes its way to Japan, you have two very popular kinds of Buddhism. And the first one is Pure Land Buddhism. So the idea here is you can clear your mind, because remember Buddhism teaches, or a lot of Buddhists, they like to meditate in order to clear their mind, and they feel that way they will be able to reach nirvana. So basically they thought that by chanting over and over again, you would be able to clear your mind, and that by chanting Amida Buddha over and over, that's what they would chant, Amida Buddha. So when Buddhism makes its way to Japan, they change it a little bit. Just like what happens, kind of like when you're playing the game of telephone, right? You get that first message, and eventually when it makes its way to the last person, the message changes, right? That's exactly what happened with Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism was kind of like Buddhism, but on training wheels, okay? In order to help people clear their mind, in order to help people meditate, Pure Land Buddhism, basically they would chant over and over again all day long to help them clear your mind, or help them clear their mind. It's kind of like when you're trying to fall asleep. I always have a lot of, it's difficult for me to fall asleep. It's difficult for me to just shut off my brain. So, you know, it's kind of like when you're sitting there and you start counting. You're counting until you get so bored and tired that you fall asleep. So Pure Land Buddhism, basically that was the idea. You chant over and over, and it was mostly for poor people because they didn't have time to go and sit there under a Bodhi tree and meditate. So they could do this while they're working. While they're working, they could basically chant over and over and help them clear their minds. And they also believed in a pure land, just like as the name suggests, a pure land, so which was basically like a heaven for them, right? So it was kind of, again, Pure Land Buddhism was like Buddhism, but on easy mode, okay? So another form of Buddhism, which was mostly for the more rich people, you have Zen Buddhism. So Zen Buddhism was basically a lot more disciplined. So it was a lot more for the wealthier people. So it was like original Buddhism, but basically, you know, they thought more highly of themselves. They looked down upon the Pure Land Buddhists because they're like, what? Look at these children over here. They can't even clear their mind on their own. They have to chant over and over again. So these are people that were allowed or able to do this completely on their own. So these different forms of Buddhism were very different than the original kind of Buddhism, okay? So it's kind of like Taco Bell, okay? Taco Bell's supposed to be, believe it or not, it's supposed to be Mexican food. I don't know what parts of Mexico they're going to, but all the places I've ever been to in Mexico, I've never seen one Mexican eat this monstrosity here. Never. That, to me, is not a taco. So they're being remixed, they're being changed from the original to a copy. And sometimes when that happens, just like you saw with Pure Land Buddhism, it changes a bit. All right, thank you guys for watching, and see you guys next time.
Cut.